Welcome, everyone. I'm David Shervill, the founder of Global Music Visions, CIC, and we're based in Portsmouth in the United Kingdom, and we facilitate music workshops for everybody, regardless of their ability and all ages. Predominantly, we started out working within sight impairment and severely sight impairment, so blind or partially sighted, and gradually we started to realize that people have maybe more than one need. So it was about how we could diversify a little bit to include more and more needs. And we also welcome the mainstream as well. So we've got very much of an open door. I am also sight impaired myself. So it initially started out of my own frustration of not being able to access music provision. And gradually working with various members of the community, we started to identify that music technology was gradually not as inclusive or as accessible as we all thought. For example, trying to use automation as a screen reader, but not using the text format, actually using the plugin window wasn't too great. But if you were working along someone who had sight, they would still want to use the original window. So we were looking at ways that we could overcome that barrier and actually look at more color contrasts, font styles, font sizes, all within different plugins. And it was suggested to me that I should contact the University of Portsmouth, which is our local university, to see if there were any students that were doing some research on these areas. And I was introduced to Sam Prouse, and we started collaboration on different ideas. We clicked straight away in terms of initial barriers that we were finding, and we decided to try and collaborate, and that's what we've been doing for the last 3 to 4 years, is it?
Yeah.
About that?
4 years now.
Yeah, it's coming up to 4 years. And it's just been eye-opening from a personal level, and now we're actually in a position where we can support young people right through to adults, whether they're new to music making or being reintroduced to music making, and giving them the opportunities to try different roles, whether they want to be producers, engineers, composers, even to some extent musicians. We've been working with people who may have been musicians back in the 60s and 70s, but for whatever reason had to step away, and we were able to support some of them to actually get back into performing again, which is very rewarding. And I would very much like to say, if there's anyone in the room or anyone online that would like to reach out and collaborate, or you think we might be able to support someone in some way, please contact us and we'll see what we can do. If you want to get in touch, you can contact us on email, which is globalmusicviz, and that's VIS for sugar, @AOL.com. You can view our website at www.globalmusicvisions.co.uk, or you can follow us on social media at globalmusicviz. And without further ado, I would now like to hand over to Sam Prouse.
Thanks, David. So hi, I'm Sam Prouse. As David said, we met just about 4 years ago now. I just started a Master of Science. I really wanted to start learning plugin development, visually impaired myself, and over the time I've been able to use less and less plugins. And again, like David said, we keep identifying these small barriers and problems, and kind of gets really frustrating sometimes. So I got to the point where I'm like, okay, I need to have a go at this myself. I learned some Max for Live during my BA, and that's what kind of got me interested in programming initially. And it was just taking the plunge then to learn Juice and C++. And at that time, I saw that Juice was releasing accessibility, and that was when I realised, okay, this is the time to go and do this and start putting this stuff into practice. So during my degree, we worked together, and I developed a fully polyphonic synthesizer that was completely screen readable. Change the colours of the UI, expand it, enlarge, and that kind of thing. And then since that, I've become quite interested in using web views, just because of the accessibility that's available. There's actually working with Juice is great and it could do most things, but then I started to hit points where I wanted to push things a bit further, and there's just not quite the tools available to kind of go that next step. So we're going to talk about accessibility today. It's a very big word, huge word. It covers so many different things, and we need to be important when we're talking about accessibility to know what type of accessibility we're talking about, because it can mean many different things to many different people. It can be environmental factors, building factors, barriers to using software, depending on the individual and their needs. It can change. So today, mainly, we're going to be looking at accessibility and software design. And I'm going to focus on two main areas today, which are visual access and non-visual access. So just to determine the difference, visual access would be used by people using keyboard navigation. The main difference between that and screen reader navigation is we'd use tab key to move forward, shift tab to move backwards. With keyboard navigation, focus only goes on the interactive elements. So a screen reader user will read label, component, output kind of thing, whereas keyboard navigation just focuses on the interactive elements. So it's really important when we're working with visual access to show focus. I know there's a bit of a trend to hide it in the web, which isn't always useful. I'm going to show some techniques later of how to change the size of it and things like that so people can actually customize it to what they need. So if they don't like it, you can turn it off. If you need it, you can make it larger. People will be using magnification, so things like color contrast and being able to resize the text is really, really important. We're also going to look at non-visual access, which we're using screen readers, refreshable braille displays, audio and speech-based access, and also looking into haptic and tactile feedback that we could be adding to systems to help people with hearing loss and that kind of thing to be able to interact more. So something I get asked about a lot and comes up quite often are standards, and therefore the lack of within music technology industry. And I must admit, there are out there, they're just very well hidden. I came across these. I was actually researching the accessibility of some Adobe software I needed to use at university. And I was looking through their documents because it wasn't working as it was supposed to. And I actually came across their accessibility conformance, which I found quite interesting. And I managed to trace that back to the ETSI.org, who it's the European Telecommunication Standards Industry. And they actually have a harmonized European standard that covers all ICT, hardware and software. And it's a very lengthy document. I wouldn't advise reading it end to end, but for software, there are actually two sections that apply. So you can kind of skip forward to 11.1-ish and then kind of go through the software. But the really interesting thing about it is when you really dig into it, most of the criterion actually come from the Web Accessibility Initiative, WCAG. And actually, when you start looking at the two together, you start to see that actually the words web page and application become pretty much interchangeable. When we're talking about things like color contrast or screen reader navigation, focus order, it's the same for a web page as an application. So this is, and the good thing about the web accessibility guidelines is there is a lot of detail. You can go and see the criterion, and within that it will tell you the intent of the criterion, who it helps, why it helps, how to implement it, that kind of thing. So there's actually quite a bit of information out there to help with this. It's just not always easy to find, and it's not directly applied to music technology, but it works. I'm going to start, before we get into the ARIA and the programming, about use of color. This is several of the criteria are based around use of color. It's important if we're using color in a UI that it's not the only means of conveying information or indicating an action, a prompt, a response, or distinguishing a visual element. And this can really affect people with color blindness and color loss. If that's a distinguishing feature, then people can't use that. So there needs to be a text alternative or another alternative. So we can use these, but we'd also need something else to back it up with text or feedback for a screen reader. And quite often it's common to sort of describe things in manual as the red button in the top left corner. That kind of doesn't mean anything to a screen reader user. So we need to be careful as well about when we're documenting things to not describe them by color, shape, size, that kind of thing. The color contrast, minimum color contrast is 4.5 to 1. except for the following, which is large text. If the text is larger, sometimes you can get away with a lower contrast because it's that bit easier to see. Incidental and logo types. Then we have enhanced, which is what I tend to aim for when I'm designing, which is 7:1, and again, except for the following large incidental and logo types. If you go with enhanced, you can guarantee most people are going to be able to use that contrast. Whereas if you're hitting the kind of lower level, it can still not be great, depending on the colors being used. And also there's non-text contrast. So this would be graphical interface components, so sliders, buttons, things like that. They have their own contrast ratio as well, 3:1. But again, I would advise trying to push further than that and get a higher contrast where possible. Another one is sensory characteristics. And that's kind of what we're talking about. Instructions for understanding don't solely rely on sensory characteristics of components, such as shape, size, color, location, orientation, or sound. And a lot of people ask, well, how do you work out the color contrasts? I've actually made a tool. It's on my GitHub pages. I'll share a link at the end. And what we have here. This is a double tool. It allows you to upload an image, and you can check that image with a different range of color blindness and color weakness filters. And I'd advise loading an image in, putting a filter on, and then you can use the color pickers at the bottom to pick colors from that image. And then you can hit the check contrast, and then that will give you the contrast ratio below and what it passes. So that's a AAA pass because see, black and white, that's about the highest contrast we can get. So it's just a little tool to help people when you're kind of working on these things. You can kind of come in, get some ideas, or you can pick two colors that make a nice contrast and you can actually see what that level is. So it's just a little tool to kind of help. And most of my stuff, what I tend to do to help people with contrast, and actually this kind of gets you around having the strict contrast, is letting users pick their own colors for the UI. And also included in this is full text control, so you can adjust the size of the font. If you want bold font, you can change the font family. When it comes to fonts, like the sans serif tend to be the most accessible of fonts. Helvetica, Arial, those kind are quite reliable. But I also always like to include things like Open Dyslexic. It's open source. It's free to use. I used it a lot at university. I still use it now as I'm dyslexic. And the weighting of the letters, it makes it much easier for people to differentiate which way around the letters are. It can be really, really useful. It's not for everyone, but it's good to include it. It's also good to be able to change the size, letter spacing and word spacing. When you have visual impairments, it's quite common for the letters to blur into each other, so being able to move them apart a little as well, that can really help people focus in on it and make it more usable. So as you can see, each component has its own set of color pickers, so you can design the UI the way you like and get the right contrasts, make the buttons stand out more if that's what you need. I've chucked in a couple of niceties as well. You can kind of just change the border radius, and you can change the thickness if you want to make things more impactful. And then the focus size. I always like to give people a choice of being able to make the focus much larger if you're visually impaired and you're using keyboard navigation, or even if you're just a long way from the monitor, it can be really helpful. And if you don't need it, then you can just turn it kind of right down. So I tend to employ that in most things that I make now. I find it's sort of quite useful for people. And like David was saying, quite often, like in piano rolls and those kind of environments, if there's not the right color contrast and it's quite small, it can be really, really difficult to use. And being able to change the color can make all the difference for people. So mainly today, I'm going to be looking at ARIA attributes. ARIA stands for Accessible Rich Internet Applications. It does what it says on the tin. It is really, really useful set of attributes, set of tools for anything you want to make accessible can be done through these. So it's a set of roles and attributes that define the ways that we make web content and web applications accessible. We can use it in HTML or we can inject it from JavaScript. And that's when it starts to become really, really powerful. As I go online, the links there, there's some really good documents that explain how they can be used. Really, really helpful. Some that we're going to look at today, and these are some of the ones that I tend to use the most, ARIA label, which in Juice that would be set title, set description. We have ARIA labeled by, so we can label a component with another component, so we can take the ID of that component and use that, or we could have a text somewhere, we could use that and bring it in. And also described by, if we want to give a description, and we have that text somewhere else in the UI, we can add an ID and bring that in and use that as a description for screen readers. Sometimes components might need to be hidden. It's not advised, but depending on its usefulness to a screen reader user, sometimes I do actually hide things if they have absolutely no relevance. ARIA Live is really useful, and we're going to focus on that quite a bit today. And that basically creates a live region. The really good thing about ARIA Live is the user doesn't have to be focused on the element to receive information from it. So we can pass in all kinds of different things and update the screen reader user constantly on what's happening. If a function's worked, then we can trigger a speech to go with that. ARIA value text is another one that I use quite a lot. I've found that's really good for updating positions of things, especially using Canvas, which I'm going to show today, and making things like XY pads and things like that. It's really good for feeding back two-dimensional data. ARIA key shortcuts, I tend to use that a lot. Most of the software I make will have a full list of keyboard shortcuts, and adding ARIA shortcuts to a component tells the screen reader user what shortcuts are available for that command. I normally put a button to turn it off as well, because you might not want to hear it all the time. When you've learnt the UI, it's just kind of extra stuff, but it's handy for that onboarding kind of situation. ARIA role description, that's another one I use quite a bit, so we can actually give things a custom name. So if I make a custom component and it's built around a slider, but I want to call it something else, then I can use role description, and then that'll be described as a note or a node or a breakpoint or whatever I need it to be. Then we have like pressed and expanded for kind of menus and that kind of thing. So the user knows if the button's opened up a menu and things like that. Selected's really important if we're making things that are like checkboxes and those kind of things. And value min and max can be quite useful. I do some stuff with speech to text to control software, and I grab the minimum and maximum so I can iterate a range back to the screen reader or the user. So that's something else that's really, really useful. So correct labeling with ARIA. You should have one of the clauses is the label should be in the name, and the name should be in the label. But here's a common example, like we've got a close button and it has an X. So we can add in there ARIA label close. So when a screen reader navigates to that, the button will say close and not X button, which can sometimes be a bit confusing. Also, we could use it for a component. So I'd probably have a label of something like frec on my UI for frequency. And you can actually extend the ARIA label. There's nothing wrong with adding a little bit more context if necessary. So rather than just having frec, I would have filter frequency if that was connected to a filter, just so the person knows exactly what they're focused on. And there we go, that's the label in name. So the name of the component needs to be in the label basically, but there's no harm in extending that. So yeah, I've also had quite a bit of luck using dynamic ARIA labeling for certain things. I'm going to show a couple of examples. So that I tend to use them in the back end in the JavaScript, and then I can pass in what other variables I'd need to be read back, or I found it quite possible to chain together several ARIA labels. I'm just going to go to a project now. So this is a prototype I was working on for a modular environment. 2 seconds. And so it's a modular environment. The audio signals can be routed through all the modules. Bear with me a second. So I'm just going to turn the screen reader on now.
VoiceOver on Chrome 127.0.0.1
So basically, the inputs and output nodes I've made accessible. I'm just going to navigate to those now.
0 AM 0 0 0 complex oscillator out group. You are currently on a group inside web content. To exit this web area.
So now if I want to pick that up, I can press P.
Picked up complex oscillator 1 output for dragging.
And I'm using ARIA Live there to repeat back the information so the user knows that they've picked that up.
Aquamarine 0.0.
Now I can move to any input.
Medium, dark 0. Oscillate C grid input 1. External magenta 2. Filter 1 in. Region. You are currently on a region. Drop complex oscillator 1 onto filter 1.
So that's
You are
picked up,
currently
that's
on a
now
region.
dropped.
Inside web content. To exit this web area. Filter
Go
1
to
out.
the output.
Region. Picked up filter yellow 20. 1. Spring green new 1. Mutator drop. Soft wavish 8. 0. New orange red. Delay in. Region. You are currently on a region. Inside web content. To exit this web area. Press Control. Option. Shift up arrow.
Sorry.
Green 2. Color well. Delay in. Orange 0. 1. 1. X. 1. New. Spring green 1. 2. Low 1. 1. Yellow. Low pass. Filter type 1. Magenta input C green. Color well. Oscillator 2 out. Region. You are currently on a color well. Magenta filter 1. Low pass. Filter 1 out. Region. You are currently dropped filter 1 onto filter 1. Picked up filter yellow 3. Dual fit 1. Low 2 1. Dual 8. New orange red. Delay in. Region. You are currently on a read 20 0 20 0 delay salmon 4 color well delay out region. Picked up delay output for dragging salmon 0
Let's
green
take that to
0
an
0
output.
1 20 1 red amp rod pod 0 seed 0 point mixer channel mix royal blue 0 amp maroon 100 5 EQ out maroon 3 gain in region. You are currently on a region. Drop delay onto output. You are currently on maroon 3. Color well. EQ output connected to delay connected to filter 1 connected to complex oscillator 1. Group.
So you can see it will now read back the complete chain.
Voiceover off.
So you can connect everything anytime you move to an input or an output now that's connected to another output. It shares the ARIA labels across all the plugins. So that could work in many different environments, in a DAW, in a lot of things if we want to quickly find out what the signal chain is. So to do this, let's just make that a little bit bigger. So basically, I have a function, the update connection info, which is part of the drop and drag mechanism. And we take the source and the target elements, just make sure that the elements were found. Then we store the initial ARIA labels. Then we can update them to reflect the new connection. So every time a new connection's added, it's added in and it's saved. So we have the source element connected to, then the target element connected to, and that way we can track the connections in both directions. So if I were to move into the middle of the audio stream, it would read from that point back to the input, and then it would go back to the place where you've gone into the chain and then explain the signal chain going forwards. So you can kind of focus anywhere on that and see where you're routing things, which is really, really useful. This is my drag and drop handler. Pretty much standard. I just connect key down listeners, and that way we can just use a simple key press, which is used in keyboard navigation. But by using the ARIA Live region, then obviously we can kind of update the information on what's happening. ARIA labeled by, as I was explaining earlier, we can use a different element by referencing its ID to use that for a different control. So we might have a settings button with a cog, and we've got settings in a heading. So we can give that an ID and just pull that ID in, labeled by HDR, and so that will be labeled as settings button, which is quite good if we're using graphics. ARIA described by, so this is kind of for supplemental help text. If there's a control and it might need a bit more context, we can use described by and give it a longer description. And you can see here we can use like described by the hint. So the ID is hint, and we could have like a format. It could be anything you like, that kind of supplementary information that's needed. So when we're labeling and when we're making components for ARIA, one of the success criterion is name, role, and value. So this is for when we're focusing on a component. The component needs an accessible name. So filter frequency, it should have a role button, slider, range, that kind of thing, and a value. Its current value. Those are the three main things that we need to hear. Some people like to hear it in different orders, different ways. Sometimes it will read the label first, sometimes it will read the value first. And I've noticed some differences between different screen readers as well, or different systems. But those are the three pieces of key information that we need in there. And it's really important. Most HTML components already have this by default, but this is more important when you start making custom components. So when I'm making like XY pads or graphical elements, like this is what we kind of need to have in there for people so they can still discover the role and the value. So an example of that would be the role of a slider. I create a label vector pad. The ARIA role description would be a node for the node that you drag. And then I would use the ARIA value text. I can pass in then a concatenated string with variables, and that way. And that's the really cool thing about screen readers. They read directly from variables, which is really nice. You can just pass this in. And I often find my debugging log is pretty much what ends up being quite often going into the ARIA live. And I've kind of got used to that now, and I kind of just write them that way. I debug a function, and then I'll just switch that out and turn it into an announce function and send it to the screen reader so they can get updates on different things. Just have a quick look at a focusable element now and show you how that works. This is a vector synth that I'm prototyping at the moment. I'll just turn on the screen reader.
VoiceOver on Chrome. Document. Google Chrome window. Document. Selected tab. Entering document web content.
So I'm just going to navigate to the XY pad now.
Enable show channel 1. X 0.50. Y 0.50. Vector pad node.
So there you got the name role value.
Inside web content. To start interacting with the slider, press.
So now if I want to move that, I'm using keyboard navigation, but you can still get screen reader feedback while using that. So I find it's really useful for things like this, where I make things in Canvas and two-dimensional graphics, to be able to get that information across. And so you can kind of piggyback on the keyboard navigation in areas like this, and you can still get the same level of feedback.
Y 0.50, X 0.63, Y 0.50, X 0.63, Y 0.49, X 0.65, Y 0.28, X 0.69, Y 0.28.
And so that's the ARIA value text announcing that.
VoiceOver off.
So yeah, it's a really kind of useful way of doing things. And to kind of set this up, I create a focusable element that I add into the graphic afterwards. And generally, I'll use a divider to make most things, just because they're quite easy to get focus. I'd use a tab index of either 0 or minus. So tab index is like focus order in Juice. In Juice, you call set explicit focus order. And the thing when working with focus order, it's something to use sparingly, actually, and it's not necessary to always use a specific focus order. I actually think it's much better to lay the components out in the order that you want them focused. So when I'm adding my parameters in Juice to the value tree state, then I'll lay the parameters out in the way that I want the screen reader to navigate through them. And it's the same with a lot of web design. When I'm working in HTML, I'll do the same kind of thing. I only use a focus order if I absolutely have to. I use a negative focus order more than anything, just to get focus on components that don't normally receive focus. That's a really quick way of kind of doing it. So this is from the actual X and Y we looked at. It has the role of a slider, so it takes on the attributes of a slider, which is nice because the focus will stay on the object and it will move with the object. Whereas if we're not always using slider, the focus might come off and it just looks a bit gnarly sometimes. So I've got a role description, which would be breakpoint or node. So I'd give that an ARIA label of breakpoint and then set an index number. So if you're going to add more in, then each one will be correctly indexed. We'll give it a minimum and maximum value. Depending on the kind of use, you might want to go with horizontal or vertical if it's actually meaningful to the user. That's something that's really good to include. And then we have the ARIA value now. and the ARIA value text. So the ARIA value now is giving us our current value, and then the ARIA value text is what we were hearing the feedback coming through, which would be the X and Y position. Something that I come across often, there's a kind of clash between accessibility and usability. Just because something is screen readable doesn't necessarily mean it's usable. And something that I sort of come across a lot in audio interfaces, frequency-based controls working in the audio range. So if I just turn on the screen reader a sec, I'm going to go to filter frequency.
Voiceover on Chrome. Document. Google Chrome window. 14,092. Filter frequency slider.
So I've got 1 hertz intervals.
14,091.
And as you can only move one at a time, you can imagine how long it's going to take me to get to 0.
14,056.
So I'm not going to put you through that. So I like to add in some little helpers to kind of help with this. I have 3 number keys that I use. We can use 1. He says
2,715.
Wrong project. Okay, but the other thing we have
2,725. 2,735.
is a modifier key. So if I hold the shift key down,
2,745. 2,755.
so
2,765.
we're moving in units of 10 now. And if I use shift command, it'll jump to moving in units of 100.
2,766. 2,769. 2,869. 2,870.
I think I picked the wrong project for this. I'm very sorry.
Voiceover off.
Let's try a different project. There we go.
Voiceover on Chrome. 1. Enter. Show. Cut. Start voice commands. 6,000. Low. 20.
So there we go. 1 snaps to the lowest,
20,000.
2 to maximum, and then I use 0.
6,000.
And that'll jump to whatever the default value is. That's quite useful if you've got something that zeros as well. You can instantly 0 it back. But then, yeah, we can jump in.
6,010. 6,030.
Units of
6,040. 6,050. 6,150. 6,250. 6,350.
So it just makes it a little bit easier for users to navigate parameters with wider ranges. Otherwise, that's why we get called keyboard warriors, because we're constantly tap, 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 tap. Something else that can be really important is getting to the right area of the UI quickly. So I tend to use some shortcuts.
Start voice commands. Stop voice commands. Group. You are
Let's
currently
just
on
go
a
back
group.
to the previous project.
Banner. Heading level 1. Alien instruments accessible projects and tools. Visit doc. Show speech settings. Button. Show speech settings. Button. Theme. Granite. Theme. Menu pop-up collapsed button. Granite. Menu item. Show manual. Button. Show MIDI LFO1 rate 11.00 shape sign LFO source. Mod envelope
So that just allows the user
filter type
to
locus
jump to
frequency
any region,
12,000.
which can be really useful. I just use the IDs for that. Each parent container that contains the modules, you can just search by the ID. So I have the ID lined up to a keyboard shortcut, and it just enables the user then to jump between
Oscillator one-way saw
different
update 0
areas.
semitone 0.0.
Because depending on the size and the complexity of the interface, you can spend a really long time navigating from one end of the UI to the other. I myself have quite a short-term memory, and I've found indoors sometimes when I'm navigating, by the time I've got where I need to be, I've finally forgotten why I'm getting there. And it can be quite frustrating, and I know other people have had similar experiences.
Voiceover off.
So I'm always trying to think about what's the quickest route from A to Z, and hopefully it's not traveling all the way through the alphabet. So yeah, custom notifications. This is what I tend to use quite a lot with ARIA Live. So we have live regions for this. Basically, it's a plain divider, and then we'd call ARIA Live polite or assertive, which are the 2 main types of notification we use. ARIA Live Polite will announce later, so it's when the screen reader goes to idle. So that with VoiceOver, that's the point that it starts repeating back the built-in commands for interact and that kind of thing. Just before that, it will announce, or you can have an assertive announcement, and that will have a short ping before it starts, and then that will give a priority announcement. So you'll get name, role, value, and then the assertive text, which can be really useful. I'm just going to go to a project and show you how that can work. So I've been looking at different ways of working with metering, because that's something that people come up across quite a lot, is being able to meter things properly and check levels and things like that with a screen reader. It can be quite difficult. I'll just fire this up. So this is a really scrappy design. It's just a bit of a quick prototype to see if this would actually work and feed back the information. I'm just going to load up a quick audio file. The audio is just being sent to the analyzers. There's no audio coming out, just so we can hear the screen reader properly.
VoiceOver on Chrome. Access start sound.
So
Button
I'm going
name.
to start that playing.
RMS-24 point. RMS-24 point. RMS
So-
mic stop. Toggle 1.50s.
We have a timer here, and we can set that, and that's the timer in between readings.
RMS-17.4 dBFS. RMS-13.5 dBFS. RMS-9.7
So you hear we're getting the RMS
dBFS.
at the moment.
RMS. Select peak. Selected radio button. 2 of 14. Announcement metric set to peak. Peak -5.5 dBFS. Peak -2.2 dBFS.
Now, if I go back and switch this to an assertive, you'll hear the difference between live and assertive.
Live regions, peak -22, peak. Selected radio button, 2 of 14. Metric to announce. Radio group, peak -0.8 dBFS.
So you get that little ping first, that's why they call it assertive,
Peak -32.4
and that'll cut in much
dBFS.
quicker.
Peak -16, crest factor. Selected radio button, 3 of 14. Crest factor 6, crest factor 8.7 dB. You are crest factor 6.4 d. Announcement metric.
So you can see most information that we kind of take for granted, that we see visually in the dials and the spectrographs, etc. You can see we can actually feed back any of that information, which is really, really useful in monitoring situations and setting levels and things like that, because if you can't see the meters visually, it can be really, really difficult. So this kind of lets you feed back a lot more information. I'm just going to go to another example now, where this lets you explore a WAV file a bit more kind of in detail. I'll just load a file in there again.
VoiceOver on Pro. Entering audio access. This demo 1. Spectrum Explorer. Selected tab. 1 of 4. 2. 3. 4. Soundscape Describer. Announce here. Button. At 1050 Hz. Level -66.2 dBFS. Neighborhood is neutral. You are currently on a button. To click this button. 1004. 3. 2.
So we've got a scene analyzer.
0.50s. You are currently on a tab panel.
That feeds back a linear list of information, so you could take a part of the file, you can go back in, then you can have a look through and you can check against the timestamps and check levels and things like that. It can be really useful.
0.5. An app 4.
Have a waveform navigator.
Main. 3. Waveform navigator. Tab panel.
So that lets you
You are
select a
currently on a
window
tab panel.
size.
Announce window.
Then we can
button.
use the arrow
You are
keys to
currently
move
on
through
at
the
0.
file.
At 0.08 seconds. Peak -5.7 dBFS. RMS -15.5 dBFS. DC -0.09%. ZCR 1950/S. And VoiceOver off.
So as you see, you can load in a file or a sample and it lets the user go through, and using ARIA Live, we can just feed back any of that information about the file. So you can kind of go through a file, find if there's peaks, if it clips, anything like that, which can be really, really useful. It's the kind of thing that would be great if it was built into doors and for monitoring and things like that. It would be really, really useful for a lot of people. So that's another use of the live notifications, and I think they're probably a really, really powerful tool that I use a lot. So how it works, we need a little bit of JavaScript. I normally create a function, I just call it announce. It takes one argument of message. So we create a region, I get so I create a divider, which would be like this one at the bottom. I tend to use like a visually hidden class, so it's hidden away because we don't need to see it. We give it a status role, and that way we can just pass text straight into it. So create a region. I tend to clear it first, so it updates every message each time. And again, we can set a little timeout on that. It's quite useful sometimes. I've used this in several different ways. I'm just going to look at a different way of using this now, which is quite useful. I know like ARIA and Native Instruments for quite some time now have been doing the thing where you can speak MIDI parameters aloud, and I know that's been like a really useful feature for a lot of people. I wanted to try and work out a way to do it. So if I go back to one of these projects, turn on the screen reader.
VoiceOver on Chrome. Document. Google Chrome window. Has keyboard 0. Oscillator 1 semitone slider.
So now I press M. I tend to make it so everyone can change the shortcuts as well. One of the criteria in the conformance guidelines is that if you're using a single key, there has to be an option for the user to map that to a modifier key as well. But I tend to make all of my shortcuts open. A lot of screen reader users and people using keyboard navigation will have their own set of key commands that they like to use. So I try to make sure that things I'm making aren't conflicting with people's setups and their systems. So I make sure that that can all be changed easily. But if I hit M now, it's going to trigger MIDI learn.
MIDI learn activated for focused control.
So I'm just passing that back into the speak function. Let me
IAC driver bus
MIDI
1.
first.
MIDI
That might
mix.
help.
MIDI device. Menu oscillator 1 semitone set to 10.00. You are currently on a button. Oscillator 1 semitone set to 8.00. Oscillator 1 semitone set to 3.00. VoiceOver off.
So you can see that gives really nice feedback on parameters. It makes it really easy to do. And working this way as well, you don't need a special controller. I'm just using a little cheap MIDI mix at the moment. You can actually connect anything you like and map it. I tend to have a section where everything's stored. So we have a list here, and we have anything that's mapped will be in there. You can save and export these via a JSON file, because with it being a web-based synth, obviously, if you clear your history or you go to another browser, you're not going to have your mapping saved. So you can kind of makes it a little bit more portable. So to achieve this, this is a kind of common setup I'll use for my MIDI in synths for so in my handle MIDI message, have normal kind of CC mapping stuff going on. But you can see in here I have the announce function, and so I'm passing in here the assign CC to the label, and we can just chuck in the variables there. And then you can see again CC mapping label set to, and then what the output is. So that gives us our constant updates through moving the slider, which will be really useful. It can be assigned to drop-down menus as well. So you can see we've got a couple of different events to dispatch depending on which we're using. So the bottom one there would be for the drop-down menu, and it'll tell you what option it's set to. And that's about it really. So it's actually quite a simple way to kind of hook this stuff up. I was expecting it to be a lot more complicated when I started looking into, how do I make this talk? But yeah, using ARIA Live, it's actually much better. I first started using ARIA value now for some of these and ARIA value text. But I found with certain screen readers, if you move the knob, it'll read every single position in between, which isn't ideal. And I'm still working on a little workaround. NVDA seems to buffer things. So quite often, even with an ARIA live, it will read out 2 or 3 intervals in between. So I'm just working at the moment with a debounce timer so that when it stops positively, it'll only read then. It's a little bit of a workaround at the moment, but I find that kind of helps. And this is something you'll probably notice if you start writing for different screen readers. Make sure you test across a wide range of screen readers. I'm a VoiceOver user. Everything works straight out of the box with VoiceOver. It's not normally an issue. I tend to find it's more when I start working with NVDA and in particular Windows Narrator as well. they need a little bit more work. They're not quite as MVDA is very good. Narrator isn't necessarily quite as good, I find. So it helps to kind of add a little bit extra. That's where the kind of the slider helpers come in as well, because it's kind of makes it just a little bit easier. And also, kind of when I'm working with the sliders here, I wasn't using the Mac Interact that you normally need to do. I use keyboard navigation for all of my commands, so that way I can grab the step interval and multiply it for the multipliers, like when I'm working with the sliders and that kind of thing. So voice control, I'm part of 5 minutes. Oh, okay. I'm just going to show a quick video that basically shows some voice control. This is something we came up with at the MIDI Association and part of the Massive group. And it was something we were all talking about. Wouldn't it be nice to just be able to talk to software? Set unison 3.
Set unison to 3.
Set vector mode orbit.
Set vector mode to orbit.
Set filter frequency 10.
Value 10 is out of range for frequency. Please say a value between 50 and 16,000.
Pick up LFO 1.
Picked up LFO 1.
Drop on filter frequency.
Dropped LFO 1 on frequency.
Pick up chorus.
Picked up chorus.
Drop chorus into chain.
Dropped chorus in chain.
So that you can see using voice control. So I don't have enough time to explain how that works. If anybody wants to know, we're going to be on the MIDI table this afternoon. Just come and have a chat. There was a few more things I kind of wanted to add in, but I'm running out of time. But you might have noticed when I set the filter frequency, I used a value below. And one of the criteria that I come across that I think is quite important is error prevention and error correction. So I have a cutoff if the given value is above or below. It won't set the parameter, but it'll read back what the range is and tell you that you've made a mistake to help you kind of realise, because I guess if you're using your voice and it's a volume control, the last thing we want to do is smack it to maximum and hurt someone's ears. So yeah, I was hoping to show a bit more, but does anyone have any questions if we've got a couple of minutes left?